It's Saturday, and today we'll be watching two matches with Crazy House wizard JannLee. First he's facing opperwezen, and later tonight he's playing against variants only. But the main event this Saturday is of course JannLee, the former world champion, playing another former world champion, opperwezen. JannLee of Australia and opperwezen of the Netherlands. And they are about to start now, I think. Both players online. We'll be watching from the view of JannLee, and this could end. I don't know how this is going to end. Who do you think is the favorite? I'm asking everyone watching. Do we have any viewers yet? No, not yet. So in a second they will be starting this match. And if we look at the ratings, I think they're fairly even matched. Both players around 2,700 Crazy House ELO. And of course they are super experienced, both players. So, let's see what's happening here. Both players online. I don't know what they're waiting for. Let's have a quick look while we're waiting at the overall standings. We see JannLee in second place, opperwezen in third, behind Katask when it comes to winning percentage. So this is probably a battle for second place. The winner will earn the right to play reigning world champion Yasugi 99. When it comes to points, opperwezen is actually in the lead, but he only has 4 matches remaining. Whereas, for instance, JannLee has 6 matches remaining. And if we look further ahead, the coming week, Zixon will be playing Clearcast, Bugzilla will take on 264 Brock, and to be confirmed, maybe next Saturday, JannLee versus Blitzbullet, another heavyweight bout. So just waiting for the match to start here. We see JannLee at 27.48. He's Crazy House ELO. He rarely plays anything other than Crazy House. So this is a pure Crazy House specialist. Whereas opperwezen is an international master in chess. So he's a strong chess player and also plays some other chess variants. And just check if someone knows when the match is going to start. So in a couple of minutes they should be ready. I just got it confirmed from the house chat on Discord. So do we have any game here? No, not really. We'll just sit and wait for the match to start and watch this from the view of JannLee. So it's hard to predict maybe which openings they're going to play. I'm sure we'll see some surprise preparation here by opperwezen. If we look at the standings between the players, you see how incredibly experienced they are, because they have played literally thousands of games against each other. JannLee is in the lead, but I think maybe nowadays it's more even. I'm sure he got a lead early in the career years ago, and maybe opperwezen has been leveling those figures a little bit. As you can see from the last few games, they look about even. So, let's get ready to rumble. Yeah, you mentioned the match before here, Brothfish, and indeed opperwezen overstepped the time limit against Katask in a very fine game. He should have won. So 6-4 would have made more sense. So we're off. JannLee and opperwezen playing a very symmetrical d4, d5 opening. JannLee opting for a kingside fianchetto, which is immensely popular among the best players. And opperwezen had to face this against Katask also. You might think that this is strong, hitting the c2 pawn and it's defenseless, but I think white just castles and then actually will sacrifice his queen here if black takes with the bishop. So it takes too long time to pick up this c2 pawn. Take with the queen and check with the bishop here. Get two pieces for a queen and a pawn and a huge lead in development. So instead opperwezen just develops quietly, putting his bishop outside the pawn chain. And we will see a strategic fight here in this game. This is a very common move, trying to take some control over the white squares. And this is taking care of the dark squares for black. White doesn't have the opportunity to put a pawn here on h6. Also, sometimes you can go back into the garage with your light square bishop. One problem to solve for both players is where to go with these knights, because they are hitting rock here. Hard to find a way forward for these knights. And also it's not so easy to reroute the knights. So this is aiming at the h6 pawn. Possible piece sacrifice here on h6, or it would rather be a trade of a piece for 2 pawns. Maybe black will simply protect the pawn. No, he hits the queen instead. And trading here on c3 would actually solve the white problem with the knight on c3 and also open his b file. And also you would have one less defender of the king side. So black has no intention of trading on c3. Instead he trades it for the dark square bishop, which relieves some pressure here on the king side. So white takes control of the e5 square. This is a little passive, I think. Maybe white could simply go to g4 with his knight, or put a knight on g4 maybe, because, well, this hits c6. I was thinking a position where white puts something on g4, black trades. This bishop on h6 just looks out of play and out of place. So, do we have any predictions here in the chat? Who do you think will win this match? Usually I think you go to e8 and protect this pawn, but for some reason opperwezen is thinking a lot here. Very sharp position here. I'm sure black was considering g4, but I think white can simply take on h6 and take on g4 with whatever piece, and he has ample compensation for the queen in that case. So rather than passive defense with queen e8, black tries for something active here. Notice that the c2 pawn is hanging, so if white isn't careful, black might just spend a tempo on grabbing the pawn. So speaking of grabbing pawns, white goes for the c7 pawn, which is, I would say, a bit surprising that he spent so much time on grabbing that rather unimportant pawn, I would say, because the white knights aren't very well coordinated here. Okay, so the light squares are a bit open here. Watch out for queen h8 mate. But this queen is doing an excellent job here, attacking white pieces and also covering g6. And maybe, sometimes it could be useful in an attack. A piece sacrifice, opening the light squares a little bit here for a pawn check and a queen check maybe. White simply giving up his queen, but eventually those diags will be depleted here. So no more. Oh, he spent his queen. That's tough. Yeah, and black simply resigned there. I'm curious about that position because I'm thinking maybe opperwezen had it under control there. Maybe he had it under control. This looks very good. What if he just protected from behind? Well, white is leading. He will regain a lot of material here. And indeed, queen g6. What a beauty. Gaining JannLee his first win of the match. And excuse me, I will just do like this. And now we have another symmetrical position here. This is a line where JannLee really feels at home. The e4, e5. He has played this probably more than anyone else. And he has given up a queen. And you might ask, where is the compensation? But look at all those light pieces. They are so active. And there are several plans here for black, I suppose. This bishop putting pressure here. And obviously black could at some point make use of the pin, just like white did. The question is, do you really take on f3 or do you go back? Maybe you want to preserve this pin. Instead he takes on h3. So he's investing a lot of material here. Well, if white takes here, knight f4 is eyeing the pawn on h3, and also black has pawn at e2. So a lot of threats here to take care of for white. So maybe this is stretching it for black here. He's going forward, but he only has one more pawn in hand. No, right now, Mayor Myresh Bors, we're watching a Crazy House game here. Or I should say a match between JannLee and opperwezen. So if you want to play me, you can do that after the match. Yeah, for sure, these squares are really important. This takes care of some light square pressure. Sometimes you can put the rook on g8, I suppose. White is trying to weaken the defense here on the dark squares and also put some pressure on the knight. Now comes the fork I was mentioning here on the queen and rook, and it actually white takes on e2 just to disrupt the... Yeah, and this is a forced mate. Beautiful finish there by opperwezen, and just a second. Let's look at this, the finish of this game. White simply took on e2. And now, when black took back, you have a knight g6. And what's happening here? Well, if you take with the h-pawn, you have immediately queen h7, and if you move the king you have queen h8, and if you take with this pawn, well, you have queen at g8 with a classic smothered mate. So nice finish there, a little tactical oversight by JannLee. 1-1. Yeah, I think taking on h3 was a bit too much. But then again, I don't have any experience at all with e4, e5 lines. But it was probably a bit over-optimistic. So this is the same line we saw before. I think maybe they repeated all the moves. But instead of going to d5, here black simply protects the h6 pawn, which I think is probably a better way of handling the black defense. And JannLee is thinking here. So very symmetrical here in the center, pressure building up. And if you think you have a fork here, well, think again, because white will simply take on e4, I think. Although you could take on c3 then. So the white queen is clearly a target here. White is probably giving, he's trying to find an opportunity to sacrifice the queen, and this seems like a good opportunity because taking here looks really bad. White will take back with his bishop, and the pressure here is just too strong. This is actually looks like a good defensive spot for the queen. So why not just take b2 here and be a bit materialistic? Black has some excellent control here on the king's side. Not an easy task to find a good spot for the two knights that white has in hand. Although, where is this guy going? Maybe you simply protect it with the pawn on a3. This is a nifty little defense, because if white takes, maybe black will simply take twice on e4. But surely white won't take here. Maybe he will take on b7 instead. Because a pawn in hand would be nice. Yeah, they have sacked their queens left and right in the first games. And indeed, the queen isn't as powerful in Crazy House and Bug House as it is in chess. The queen is worth about 2 pieces, or let's say a piece and 2 pawns. And if you consider the initiative also, sometimes you can just give it up for a piece, just like JannLee did in the last game. So the position looks fairly balanced here. Yeah, well, now he has c6 maybe for the knight. Although I like this move, putting pressure on the bishop and also giving this knight a target here on e5. White does not want to give up the e5 pawn. So this looks strong for black. And white simply cannot retreat, so he has to push forward here. So this potentially could open up a lot of scope for the bishops here. Yeah, well, simply, of course, white would win a queen there, but black would be happy to just give up his queen. It would weaken the white king side. So the queen is sort of buried here in the corner. I was thinking maybe black should have taken on e5 before he sealed the exit for the black queen. Both players down here to the last 20 seconds. And I'm sure he will take on f6 and just give the queen for 2 pieces. Looks like an excellent defensive setup here for black. He can give up another queen if he likes. He has so much pieces to put on the board. Still looks, I would say, fairly balanced. And black quickly needs to place all his light pieces on the board now. So this was a nice trick here by JannLee, putting pressure here, which makes this threat a lot bigger. And opperwezen just oversteps the time limit, which surprises me. He needs to be more resilient in those positions. Let's have a look at the question here. Why didn't where was it? It was around here, wasn't it? D takes c4. Yeah, let's say here. So if white takes here and places the bishop on d3, this is simply super good for black. Look at the weakened squares around the king, for instance, like this, and black is safe and white is in a hopeless position. So let's go back to the game. JannLee in the lead, 2-1. And we're seeing once again a duel here in the e4, e5 opening. Very symmetrical, and this is a standard queen sacrifice. Giving up the queen for some interesting compensation here. And this wins back the queen. And I'd say, since he's winning back the queen, black should be fine here, I suppose. I see no reason why he wouldn't be fine. The question is, do you take on g2 or do you take the bishop? I'm not sure. Although black has sacrificed a little bit here. Taking on g2 seems like the more aggressive option here. Threatening simply to retreat here and place a pawn on g2. And if white takes here, maybe black will simply take back on c6 and handle this in a strategic way. Although even pawn at g4 seems like an interesting option as well. So this move covers the e3 square. And also it hits the bishop on f6. I'm wondering if you take maybe on c6 now. Let's say take on c6, king takes here, and bishop h5. So look out for the g7 square here. But right now, white only has one diag, so black might consider retreating with a knight. Yeah. If white had two diags, he would play simply a diag here, king takes, and knight at h5, and the other diag on g7 mate. But right now he only has one. So maybe now is the time to put something on g7, and then you have pawn g2 check. Wow, black's just making use of the fact that white only has one diag here. So you can take on g2 and then put something on g7 maybe. So still, white has the problem that he has no diags here for g7. Now he has one. But that won't help him a lot. But maybe now, something on g7. I'm just too nervous here not to put something on g7. But I suppose you could keep on... Maybe retreat to e3, can you? What if pawn g2 then? Maybe you take on g2. Crazy position here. Wow, so threatening the queen here. Also covering h5. I'm not sure this is important, but definitely threatening to put something on g2 here. And if white blocks, well, black will simply pick up the queen. This looks like the end, maybe. Of course, white can deflect the knight, but what now? Yeah, nothing for white. Impressive win there by black. And JannLee showed the strength of that queen sacrifice. I'm seeing that you're discussing some chess variants here. Let me just recommend one really silly variant. That is, and you probably need to be drunk or something to really appreciate it, but whenever you take a piece of your opponent, you need to place it somewhere on the board. So try that one. This looks strange. Let me just comment a bit about this. So white provoked f6, but provoking is not maybe the right word, because f6 is sometimes a very useful move in these positions, and surely d2 isn't the best square for that bishop. So this just looks like something, some ordinary position with the tempo down for white. Black has some really natural squares to put its pieces. Of course, the knight goes to e7, then the bishop goes to d6. This looks fine for black. When if you're asking about the variant I was speaking about, you need to put it on the board in the same move. So if you add some alcohol to the mix, it's actually quite fun, and it's really madness. It makes Crazy House and Bug House look really zane. But white actually managed to create some confusion here in the opening. What if you take on f7 and then check here? Is that something? No, probably not, because of bishop g6. What is this? It just looks bad for white, but maybe I'm missing something. Black has a really tight defense here, and I'm not sure what white is up to. Maybe black can finish the development here with the knight. Yeah, this knight can go to b4, and you have connected the rook and queen, and maybe you can oppose white forces here on the h file in a little while. Well, I like black here. c2 is weak, and black's defensive forces are very well coordinated. This bishop is already good, and this bishop lurking here behind the f-pawn might come to life. This is provoking white to put a rook here on h7, but I'm not sure the rook is a happy camper there, because black might even just take on h7, and then when the queen takes, you have rook h8, rook at h8, I should say. Such strong defense here around the black king. One way to proceed would simply trade, maybe play knight b4. Where to put your knight? You could put it maybe on g4. e4 is another square, but you don't want to give white a knight, because then maybe rook h7 followed by knight h6 is a problem. So you might want to hang on to the knight for a while. So simply putting the queen on the board. This is a good square because not only does it threaten the rook, but you have tricks like knight at f3. So JannLee closes the g file here just to avoid any pinning fork tricks, but look at that queen sacrifice. Will he take on h2 as well? It does look dangerous, although you don't want to give up that bishop unless you're really sure that it's good. So maybe simply rook to h8. Wow. Maybe opperwezen was overthinking this, I'm not sure, but he has a very well coordinated attack here. The knight can land on g4. I'm thinking maybe black should have closed the exit with knight g4 before he checked here on h2. Only a few seconds left for opperwezen, who has some interesting compensation for the queens. Not so easy to find a square to put the queen on. Tremendous board control by the black pieces. So finally he finds a square because the pawn on f4 is blocking the d6 square. And now it looks like white is back in the driver's seat. Yeah, bishop e6. And JannLee is in the lead by 4-1. I think opperwezen missed something there. I'm fairly sure. This looks balanced. But actually the computer... What does the computer think about this? It says equal. Yeah, take on h2. Looks good. So this is where it got out of hand a little bit. Simply take on h2 and then rook h8. With tremendous compensation here for black. And here obviously knight at g4 keeps the rook cornered, keeps the king cornered, I should say. And here should have taken on g3, yeah. And I'm not sure what's happening here. Yeah, this is probably good for white. Oh well, black missed a chance there. Nice play, I think, in the opening. And let's get back quickly to the match. And opperwezen here in berserk mode. He's playing the Evans Gambit, opening a lot of diagonals and lines, and look at the clock. JannLee spending a lot of time here. So white has given up some material, but this knight is hanging, the bishop is hanging, there's a queen check maybe here on b3, a lot of threats. Not so easy to handle the black defense. So taking on b4 looks very natural, and then maybe you have bishop d5 check taking on c6 and picking up the e5 pawn with an ongoing attack. So this protects the e5 pawn. If the knight takes, you have bishop c4 check, picking up the knight on b5. c3, was c3 hanging? You mean here, or? Yeah, I don't think taking on c3 was good, actually. Let's look afterwards. Although, if you pick up the piece here, you do have some, maybe, knight e2 check stuff. Or do you have a knight? So, interesting compensation here for white, who's only sacrificed a pawn. This looks good for white, I would say. White is much better coordinated here than black is. And white is attacking from left and right. He could be attacking from this side and also from this side. He could go for the light squares or for the dark squares. Very difficult defense ahead here for JannLee, who's behind half a minute on the clock also. Yeah, Crazy House is very much like shogi. You're right, Saigam. And for those who haven't played Crazy House before, I really recommend this game. Yeah, and I think Chesgi is a much better name, which describes the variant much better. I think Crazy House was something that someone at Fix made up just to have a name for the game. And of course they looked at the Bug House name, it means the same. I think Crazy House is actually much older than Bug House. So I think Crazy House came first. So, classic attack here by opperwezen, putting the knight in the corner, and black cannot afford to take here because of stuff like rook f8, and this is looks like a nice attack here for white. Maybe he should put the pawn on f7. Is that a good move? Pawn f7. I'm thinking knight takes, knight takes. I'm not sure. But JannLee is such a stubborn defender in positions like these. So white would like to have a knight here for d5 maybe, driving the king further out on the board, and this is looking bad for black. And indeed, this move is just killing black. Opperwezen having some fun here. Black doesn't have any threats whatsoever. So JannLee resigns. Nice one. 4-2. Someone mentioned maybe black could have taken on c3. In this position. And it does pick up a pawn, but white has a super strong attack. Notice that checking here and taking here is just bad because of knight e2 check, but knight g5 looks strong. And let's get back to the match. It's 4-2 in favor of JannLee, who's once again playing that, I'd say, rather passive wide opening. But he handled it really well. But I don't think a computer like this. So some simple development here by black. Notice that black hasn't castled kingside here, so there could come a pawn push here by black. Maybe. So black being a lot more tricky in this game than he was in the game before. Not allowing the trade here on f5. White is playing a very slow, like turtle-like setup here. So preventing any future e4 pawn pushes. Nice move, also taking care of the pressure against the h7 pawn. The knight is here. The knight here is, it's not clear what the knight is doing. Although it looks like it's safe. Somehow black would like maybe to move his knight over to the king side, but it takes a lot of time. So black just putting a piece on the board in an active spot, looking forward and also backwards. This looks passive, I'd say. So if you could compare the knight g4 piece drop to the bishop g3 piece drop, I'm in favor of the knight g4 piece drop. Well, the capturing trading makes it both more complicated and, in a way, actually slightly less complicated than chess, because there are so many forced lines, I would say. Chess is less forced than Crazy House is, but if you look at the number of possible moves, well, since the pieces are recycled, there are definitely more possible moves in Crazy House. The moves are infinite in the right sense of the word. So maybe the idea is to take here and put the pawn on g5. An interesting defensive setup here by opperwezen. Has brought all his pieces toward the king side now, except the knight on c6. But white has a passive piece here also, so it looks more or less equal still. Yes, this bishop is super passive. And white needs to be careful here because this bishop is also a bit passive. So black could have a lead in power here on the king side pretty soon. As soon as he places those knights and the pawn, looks like black will be in great shape then. So I sense that the tide in this game, where JannLee has had the initiative for a while, the tide is turning a little bit. So trying to break out of prison here with a knight, but this is a massive wall, and actually black is closing in here on the white king. You don't want to take the passive bishop here. You just want to place your pieces on the board, bring the knight out of the corner somehow. Yeah, get a couple of pawns here for f3 and g2. So a very solid attack here by black, who seems to have... You usually say that the knights are poor defenders, but these knights are doing a good job here defending the black king, who has his back against the h5. And white needs to be careful. He cannot give all those rooks because there are mates here in the corner eventually. Threatening knight g5. Big blunder here in the end by opperwezen, I think. Because he must have been a lot better there. I feel sorry for opperwezen. Yeah, this is good for black. Well, this is unclear, but somewhere here, for sure. Well, the computer thinks this is swinging back and forth, actually. Good for black, good for white. Epic game. And I thought black was good here, but apparently I was wrong. No, here black is good. Tricky position. Well, black should have put something here, and probably the bishop, because then black has the threat of knight h3. Yeah, so bishop g2 here was strong, and still something on g2, but that was... And still something on g2 here, even here. Okay. After this, white is simply winning. Okay, very interesting game there. And it's 5-2 JannLee. We see the same Evans Gambit line here. But this time Black gives up a piece. Rather surprisingly, I would say. He gives up a piece for 2 pawns, which is okay material-wise. But here White has the initiative, so I don't quite understand the Black play here, I have to say. I think this is bad for Black, simply. I don't think JannLee is a happy camper here, behind that wall of pawns. Way too passive for Black. Black has problems. He would like to push the D pawn, but the E pawn is a target. Maybe White can push B5 and then pick up E5. So this move protects E5, but those 2 White pawns missing just means that the extra piece White has open diagonals and lines and everything. So not much to show for the minus piece here for Black. Yeah, I'm sure the evaluation graph of the last game is indeed interesting. They were both trading favors with each other. So White gave back a piece here with some this is looking really strong. Let's say the king goes back. You play pawn G7 and then you threaten to pick up the rook, which would spell death here in the corner eventually. But if the rook moves, then you have bishop takes F7 and White switches to a light square attack. So probably pawn G7. You want that rook. And now just take on F7, I'd say. You might consider knight G5 also. So let's say bishop takes, king takes, knight G5. The king needs to go out on the board. And JannLee, being a courageous defender, has a plan here. He wants to pick up those pawns with the king. Another way to do this would be pawn E6. Pawn E6, because if king takes, you have knight G5, king D7, and you can sacrifice your queen here on G4. Pawn E6. What is Black to do then? Because it's quite a different story if you have the pawn here and you haven't moved the knight to G5 yet. Opperwezen is low on time here. Surely he's winning, but he needs to find that win also. Now he has some fork tricks here, picking up a queen, and the king looks safe. Threatening H5. Should be winning this. Yeah, of course it's winning. But now White doesn't have a knight, so let's say something Maybe a bishop. No, you cannot. The problem is that white is threatening queen f7 here. And if the king goes back, the rook is hanging. Too many squares to cover here. Yeah, sorry. I don't get challenges that often. Maybe twice a year or something. But I will... I don't know who this tubby guy is, because I don't want to play him at all. Yeah, get lost. So a magnet sacrifice here, bringing the king out and cutting off the king. It won't see home in this game. Threatening queen h5. Checkmate. Let me just take a quick look at the pawn e6 move I thought was so strong. This is good for white. Maybe I'm just hallucinating, but I thought this was good. Okay, so he can play e6. And maybe this wasn't so good. It's 5-3 JannLee, who keeps repeating that passive, turtle-like white opening. This is like a tennis player who just puts his first serve into the court just to get a game going. And remember that opperwezen did get a decent position last time. So trading this knight, it makes sense because it's not so good sitting here on c3. Black has some problems with his c6 knight. And once this bishop goes, well, of course, unless it trades on d3, the bishop on d3 would have been very strong. So black decides to trade on d3. So very rigid pawn formation here in the center. Not so easy for either player to push forward. This is a nice move, putting pressure on this knight and also on the d4 square. And if white trades here on f5, this knight finally has a natural way out of the queen side. Yeah, white plays the bishop on d2. Well, I suppose it's a move. It's not a very active move. It does control the b4 square. It allows the rook to go to c1, but it's trapped behind the pawn on e3. And wow, I have 200 followers. Lucky me, I had a bottle of champagne here in the fridge. Maybe I'll open it later. Thank you so much for following me. We see the same kind of kingside pressure here. Almost like a caterpillar attack here by JannLee. It's so slow. It's like watching an explosion in slow motion. Sometimes you can take on e6 here and replace the knight with a knight on f4. But this puts strong pressure here on the light squares. Okay, and this queen is ready to die for her country. If black threatens g4, white will simply take on f5 and keep on taking. But e6 is protected. Why do I get the feeling that something went wrong here for JannLee? Because now you can protect the pawn from behind. As a matter of fact, you don't even need to protect the pawn. You could simply ignore it, maybe. Because a knight on e5 would be nice to have. Yeah. What's happening here? So opperwezen grabs the material quickly here. How far away is the black attack? Too far away. Well, pawn h6 looks natural. Taking and replacing, or rinse and repeat, as I think the JannLee expression is. So possibly white will take on f6 and then put a pawn on g7. So here comes the black counterattack, but it seems rather slow. Although white needs to be careful, because if you take, maybe pawn at g2 is strong. You need to cover h1. Maybe knight h4. Threatening f3. So now that white needed to place his knight on the board, the white attack isn't as dangerous as it was before. And now he placed his rook also. He wants to save the pawn for g7. Threatening f3. But there's a mate in one. Poor opperwezen, he's fighting so well, but Somehow JannLee just gets the better of him almost every game here. So what's this? She should have taken e6 here. Yeah, because something went wrong here, as I said. He should have taken e6, because this is just good for black. Pawn f7 was too passive. Yeah, just ignore the threat towards e6, and you won't have this problem. This internal problem, because this is good for white. This seemed like a slip, but not as bad as the allowing knight f6 mate. Okay, it's the last game, and once again we see opperwezen sacrificing a pawn in the opening. JannLee gave a piece, and I think we saw d3 before, but opperwezen deviates, pushing forward, giving back a piece. But bringing the queen out is double-edged, because it could provide a target for black. Black, who has, I should say, f7 covered by 1, 2, 3 pieces. So if black can take here on c6, gain a tempo, open up this diagonal, I think black is in great shape. And I think opperwezen is realizing that his opening has backfired a bit. Maybe looking for a way to give his queen for some reasonable compensation, but I don't quite see how. Because if you take here, black will take, and well, b7 is hanging. So rather passive pawn placement here, but gaining time, putting pieces on the board, and black is indeed in great shape. Yeah, almost, it's more than 9,000 games that they have played. Even though most of the games I think are 1-0 games, but let's say every game takes a couple of minutes at least. 20,000 minutes, that's a lot. They played for days. So, how's the material? Black slightly behind, but he has a great opportunity here to seize the initiative. All his pieces are in great places, and now he's aiming for the f3 square. White was prepared and quickly places his bishop here on the b2 square, because the lone diagonal just got opened. And with two excellent bishops like this, mate is never far away. I was thinking maybe white could have played pawn h6 there, just ignoring the threat against the queen. So this is a slower build-up of the attack. What white would like to do is maybe play bishop at f6 and then knight h6 mate. Bishop at f6 obviously also threatening the queen here. Wow. What's happening here? I was thinking maybe I had an idea for black how to actually get an attack. I was thinking, but maybe I'm wrong. He could have played pawn at f3 because the threat then would be to place a rook in the corner here and king takes and bishop and king takes and and bishop takes and knight h3 mate. Is there a mate here? I don't see it. The king just moving around and it looks safe to me. Yeah, another. Yeah, this is over. Very nice defense there by JannLee, who takes this match by an impressive 7-3. The same margin that Katask beat opperwezen by. But I think maybe JannLee was a little bit more impressive in his win. Yeah, very nice loop there by the king. Let's take a look at this last game because there was so many interesting things happening here, and we can look at it from the beginning. Why not? So e4, e5, and this is the move that opperwezen plays, and theoretically it looks just bad, but white does get some interesting compensation. Okay, so the computer recommends pawn at h3, but I'm sure opperwezen has had a look at that. So, yeah, I don't like this for black. He does get two pawns for the piece, but he is behind in development. We saw, I think, pawn d2, d3 in one game. This is not as good as the other lines opperwezen tried, because here black gets a very fine position, I think. Queen h5, yeah. Oh. So the computer spots an interesting move here. Take on g5 and then d4. What's this? Typical computer line, I'd say. Crazy. But white does get an enormous attack here with his bishop. With his bishops and the knights just waiting there in hand. Wow. Take on g5. Pawn g6. Instead he took on b7, and now black is clearly better. But maybe e4. The computer does recommend e4, but what about this? Pawn f3 does look a lot quicker. So this was bad. Yeah, and I was saying pawn at h6, and the computer says take on g7. I wonder how this is. Yeah, this is also very good for white, it looks. And this is a very instructive position. You have the choice between moving the queen and going on the attack. And you should just ignore the queen, because if you just calculate a couple of moves ahead, you see that black can take on e2, but he will have to spend more time to get close to the white king. So here, white missed a chance to win the game. After this, I was thinking pawn f3 here. And indeed, this is very good. Let me just show the idea. Let's say white places a bishop here on f6. This is a very typical mate. So pawn f3 was good. And now the mistake was to check on h6. That just cost too much. And look at that king running around. Teasing white. Okay. Going full circle there. And white is just lost. Okay. Nice little finish there in the end, but opperwezen had his chances. Thank you so much for watching, and later tonight, let's look at the calendar. That's 9 p.m. It's 3:30 here in Sweden, so in 5.5 hours I'll see you again. Take care, and thanks for watching. If you stay tuned, I will see if I can find some other stream that we can